The smell of garlic and rosemary filled my home, a scent my daughter Sarah had called her favorite since she was 7 years old. Steam still rose from the pot roast I'd spent 3 hours preparing, a dark, rich centerpiece on the kitchen counter. It was Valentine's Day, and I had hoped for a quiet dinner, a small moment of peace. Sarah sat at my kitchen table, her hands folded primly around the gift bags she'd brought. The irony wasn't lost on me. Through the doorway, I could see her husband, Mike, lurking. At 49, he already looked like he'd given up on life, with a receding hairline and a perpetual scowl etched into his face. He'd been loitering there for 10 minutes, a silent predator waiting for the right moment to strike. "Dad, Mike and I have been thinking," Sarah began, her voice carefully measured. "We think it's time for you to move somewhere special. A place where professionals can take care of you." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I gripped the back of my chair, my knuckles turning white. "What?" I managed to get out, the sound echoing off the kitchen walls I'd painted every 5 years for the last 3 decades. "What fool came up with this idea? I'm still full of strength." Mike stepped forward, finally committing to the room. "John, you're not who you used to be. This will be better for everyone." "Better for whom?" I shot back, my eyes locking onto his. "For you to take over my house? If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you." Sarah's face crumbled, a performance she'd clearly practiced, but I caught a flash of something else in her eyes. Guilt. Fear. "How can you say that? We care about you." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Care about me? If you cared about me, you wouldn't be sitting in my kitchen talking about shipping me off to some institution." I gestured toward the dining room, where 40 years of family photos lined the mantelpiece, pictures of a life I'd built for her. 40 years I worked 3 jobs to give you an education, Sarah." My voice was low, shaking with a rage I hadn't felt in years. 40 years of 16-hour days so you could have everything you ever wanted. Mike moved closer, positioning himself between me and the front door. The movement was subtle, but I'd learned to read body language in Vietnam. This wasn't a discussion. It was a trap. "The paperwork is already filed," he said, pulling a manila folder from his jacket and dropping it onto the table with a thud. The sound was obscene in the quiet of my kitchen. "We found a really nice place. Sunset Haven. They have activities, medical care on site, everything you need." "I don't need anything except to be left alone in my own house," I roared. This was the kitchen where I'd taught Sarah to scramble eggs, where we'd celebrated every birthday, every small victory. Now, it was the scene of my betrayal. Sarah stood up, her chair scraping against the linoleum. "Dad, please. You fell last month. What if something happens and no one finds you for days?" "I didn't fall. I slipped on ice you would have seen if you visited more than once every 2 months." The accusation hung in the air between us. "And since when do you care what happens to me? You haven't called in 3 weeks." "That's not fair," she said, but her voice wavered. Mike stepped closer again. I could smell his cologne, something expensive and cloying. "Look, old man, this is happening whether you like it or not. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." "Are you threatening me in my own home?" "I'm being realistic," he said, his voice flat and cold. "You can come with us tomorrow morning, or we can have the county make the decision for you. Choice is yours." The pretty pink gift bags on the table seemed to mock me, props in a performance I hadn't known I was watching. My 70-year-old heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind was suddenly crystal clear. They had planned this. Every word, every gesture. Get out. I pointed toward the door, my finger trembling. Both of you, get out of my house. Sarah's face went pale. Dad, we're not leaving without... I said, get out. The pot roast continued steaming on the counter, forgotten. Valentine's Day dinner for 3 that would never be eaten. Mike smiled, and it was the coldest thing I'd seen since the jungle. We'll be back tomorrow morning at 9. Have a bag packed, or we'll pack it for you. The front door slammed behind them, leaving me alone with the silence and the smell of a meal that had turned to ash in my mouth. Through the window, I watched Mike's BMW pull out of my driveway, the red taillights disappearing into the night, carrying my daughter away from me forever. Sleep hadn't come. I'd spent the night barricaded in my bedroom, every light in the house blazing, a baseball bat resting across my knees. I stared at the ceiling, remembering the day I'd bought this house. Sarah was 12 then, and she'd picked out the paint color for her room. Sunshine yellow, she'd called it. At 9 sharp, the moving truck pulled into my driveway. Its diesel engine rumbled, a vulgar sound that violated the morning quiet. Then came the heavy footsteps on my front porch, the doorbell, then pounding. Dad, open up! Sarah's voice, higher pitched than usual, strained with false concern. We know you're in there. I stayed put. Let them break down the door if they wanted in so badly. But then I heard the key turn in the lock. My spare key, the one I'd given Sarah for emergencies. This qualified, I supposed, just not the kind I'd ever imagined. Mike appeared in my bedroom doorway, flanked by 2 large men in matching uniforms, movers, professional muscle. Don't make this difficult, old man. This is my house, I said, my voice hoarse. I'm not going anywhere. Your stuff is already packed, Mike announced. Packed? I struggled to my feet, my cane sliding across the hardwood. You haven't packed anything. You just got here. Sarah pushed past Mike, her eyes red. Real tears or manufactured ones, I couldn't tell anymore. Dad, this is temporary, until we get your affairs in order. What affairs? My affairs are in perfect order. I jabbed my cane toward the dresser, where my important papers sat in a neat stack. Birth certificate, marriage license, my wife Dorothy's death certificate, my will. All exactly where they'd been for 15 years. One of the movers was already in my closet, pulling shirts off hangers with brutal efficiency. My navy dress uniform, the suit I'd worn to Dorothy's funeral, the Christmas sweater Sarah had given me last year, everything treated like inventory in a warehouse. Stop touching my things! I swung my cane, but Mike caught it easily, twisting it from my grip. Bob, Jim, get his stuff loaded, Mike ordered, not even looking at me. We're on a schedule. The efficiency was terrifying. These men had done this before. They moved through my house like a SWAT team, boxing up 40 years of memories in less than an hour. My tools went into unmarked boxes. The photo of Dorothy and me on our wedding day disappeared into a shroud of bubble wrap. The Purple Heart, I'd never talked about, not even to Sarah, vanished into a cardboard container labeled MISC. Where are you taking everything? I demanded, my voice cracking. Storage unit, Mike said, not looking up from his clipboard. Until we figure out what to keep. Until they figured out what had value, he meant. What could be sold. They herded me out of the house and into the back of Mike's BMW. The child safety locks clicked shut. I watched through the window as my life was loaded into a truck, my own home becoming a foreign landscape. Sunset Haven looked exactly like what it was: a warehouse for the unwanted elderly, a red brick facade, a manicured lawn, and a sign advertising compassionate care for your loved ones. The parking lot was full of sedans driven by middle-aged children making the same choice Sarah had made. A man named Eric Palmer met us at the front desk with a smile that never reached his eyes. He was in his 30s, wearing a perfectly pressed polo shirt and holding a clipboard. "Mr. Connor, we've been expecting you. I'm Eric, and I'll be helping you get settled today." "I don't want to get settled," I said through gritted teeth. "I want to go home." "I understand this is a big transition," he said, his voice dripping with synthetic sympathy. "But you're going to love it here. We have bingo on Wednesdays, movie nights on Fridays, and the best medical staff in the county." Sarah finally looked at me directly, her face a mask of practiced sorrow. "Dad, we'll visit. This isn't goodbye." But we both knew it was. Room 247 had beige walls, a narrow bed, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot where Mike's BMW had been parked just an hour ago. My belongings, or what little they'd brought, looked foreign here, like artifacts from someone else's life. The photo of Dorothy in her nurse's uniform sat on the plastic nightstand, her smile a beacon in this sterile room. My toolbox, the one I'd carried to 3 different jobs for 30 years, sat uselessly in the corner next to a walker I didn't need. Eric Palmer stood in my doorway, still wearing that practiced smile. "Mr. Connor, dinner is at 6 p.m. in the dining hall. Medication distribution is at 8 a.m., and 8 p.m. visiting hours end at 9 p.m. Any questions?" "When can I leave?" "Well, that would be up to your family and our medical staff to determine," he said, checking his watch. "I'll let you get settled. Welcome to Sunset Haven." The door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone with the institutional smell of disinfectant and the distant sound of television game shows. I sat on the edge of the bed and picked up the photo of Dorothy. She'd been 43 when it was taken, just 4 years younger than Sarah was now. Beautiful, proud, wearing the uniform she'd worked so hard to earn. We'd been married 22 years when the cancer took her, and not once had she looked at me the way Sarah had today, with calculation, with inconvenience, with the cold assessment of someone deciding whether something was worth keeping. The memory hit me like a physical blow. Sarah at 18, accepted to Northwestern, but worried about the cost. Me working days at the auto shop, evenings at the hardware store, weekends doing handyman jobs for neighbors. I slept 4 hours a night for 2 years so she could have her dream. I'd sold my motorcycle, the 1967 Harley I'd bought with my first paycheck home from Vietnam. I'd sold my father's watch, the one he'd carried through World War II. I'd sold everything that mattered to me so Sarah could matter to herself. And now she throws me away like garbage. The walls of room 247 pressed in around me. 70 years old, but my hands were still steady, my mind still sharp. I'd survived the Tet Offensive, raised a daughter alone after Dorothy died, built a business from nothing and sold it for enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. They thought I was just another confused old man to be managed and medicated. They were wrong. From somewhere down the hall came the sound of voices, other residents gathering for dinner, stories being shared, complaints about children who visited less and less frequently. But I wasn't listening to the words. I was listening to the tone. Resignation, acceptance, defeat. I stood up and walked to the window. In the parking lot below, a new car was pulling in. Another family, another conversation about what was best for everyone involved. The cycle continuing. But not for me. I wasn't like the others shuffling through these halls in their slippers and hospital gowns. I was John Connor, and I'd been underestimated before. It hadn't ended well for the people who'd made that mistake. 2 days in this place had taught me its rhythms. Most residents shuffled around in fuzzy slippers, staring at soap operas with vacant expressions. But near the windows in the common room, I'd noticed something different. 3 people sat together each morning, talking in low voices while others dozed in their wheelchairs. Unlike the rest, their eyes held fire. On Sunday morning, I walked toward them, my cane tapping against the polished linoleum with each deliberate step. "You look like someone who doesn't belong here either," the woman said as I approached. She had silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes as sharp as broken glass. Mary Johnson, according to the nameplate on her door. A former English teacher, if the way she held herself was any indication. "Depends on what you mean by belong," I said, settling into the 4th chair. I noted how the group had unconsciously arranged themselves facing away from the staff station. "I mean," said the man next to her, who had grease still embedded under his fingernails despite being here for who knows how long. "None of us are senile. None of us are dying. And none of us signed up for this circus voluntarily." Frank O'Connor. He had to be. The way he sized up problems reminded me of the engineers I'd known in the service. The third man studied me with the measured gaze of someone who'd spent decades reading people for a living. Robert Wilson wore the institutional pajamas like the rest of us, but somehow managed to look distinguished anyway. My son took my house, promising he'd take care of me. Mary's voice carried the particular bitterness of maternal love betrayed. Now he never calls. Sold it for half its value to some developer friend of his. I didn't find out until I was already here. Frank snorted. "At least your kid waited until you were gone. My daughter sold my garage for pennies as soon as I signed the power of attorney. 40 years building that business. Gone in a week." "Power of attorney abuse," Robert said quietly. "Classic financial elder exploitation. The law is on our side, if we can prove the deception." Their stories hit too close to home. Sarah's practiced face in my kitchen. Mike's threats. The moving truck waiting like a hearse. My daughter and her husband convinced me this was temporary, I heard myself saying. They said they needed to get my affairs in order. 40 years I worked 3 jobs to pay for her education, and this is how she says thank you. Mary reached over and patted my hand. Her fingers were bird-thin but surprisingly strong. "How long have you been here?" 2 days. 3 weeks for me," she said, pulling a package of cookies from her sweater pocket. "Care package from my neighbor. The only person who still remembers I exist." Frank accepted a cookie with a grunt. 2 months for me. Robert's been here the longest. 6 weeks. Robert's lawyer mind was clearly working, piecing together the patterns. The staff here, particularly Eric Palmer, facilitates these family betrayals. For a fee, of course. What kind of fee? I kept my voice casual, but my pulse quickened. "Hard to prove without documentation," Robert admitted. "But I've observed enough phone calls, enough paperwork irregularities. This place profits from keeping families separated while assets get liquidated." Mary leaned forward, her sharp eyes intense. "Robert thinks we might have legal recourse if we can document the fraud." "More than might," Robert said firmly. "I've been taking notes, tracking patterns. We're not just victims here. We're witnesses to systematic elder abuse." Frank's eyes lit up with something I recognized from my Navy days, the look of a man who'd found his mission. So, what do we do about it? We gather evidence, Robert said. Document everything. Build a case they can't dismiss as the confused ramblings of elderly people. And then we fight back. The words hung in the air between us. Around the room, other residents dozed or stared blankly at television screens, but our little circle buzzed with purpose. "I'm in," I said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes." Mary smiled, and for the first time since arriving, I felt something other than despair. Good, because we're going to need all the help we can get. Frank cracked his knuckles. About time someone stood up to these vultures. Robert nodded approvingly. I'll start drafting our documentation strategy. John, would you mind keeping your ears open around the facility? Fresh eyes see things the rest of us might have missed. I can do that, I promised. As we dispersed for lunch, I felt lighter than I had in days. They thought they'd isolated me, made me helpless. Instead, they'd given me exactly what I needed. Allies with nothing left to lose. Tuesday night, 9:30 p.m. The hallways of Sunset Haven took on a different character after lights out. Shadows stretched longer, and the institutional cheerfulness faded into something more honest, more sinister. I'd been lying awake for hours, my mind replaying fragments of overheard conversations. Eric Palmer's interactions with new families followed the pattern Robert had identified. Too helpful, too knowledgeable about legal loopholes, too eager to expedite paperwork. Thirst gave me the excuse I needed to explore. My cane tapped softly against the linoleum as I made my way toward the kitchen. The night staff barely glanced up from their station. Just another old man shuffling around, harmless and forgettable. That's when I heard Eric's voice, low and confident, coming from around the corner near the administration office. I froze, pressing myself against the wall, the cool paint a shock against my back. "Yes, Sarah, the documents are ready. Your father is officially incapacitated." My blood turned to ice. Sarah's voice came through the phone, tiny but audible. "Perfect. When can we start selling the house?" "Give me a week," Eric replied smoothly. "For an extra $5,000, I'll expedite the process." My hand found my phone in my pocket. Muscle memory from the few times Sarah had taught me to use the voice memo function kicked in. My thumb found the button, and I pressed record, praying it was working. The medical evaluation was easy to fabricate, Eric continued, his voice laced with smug satisfaction. "Dr. Martinez never actually examined him, just signs the forms I prepare. Your father's been declared mentally incompetent, which gives you full power of attorney." "What about the neighbors?" Sarah asked, a note of anxiety in her voice. "They know he's fine." "Doesn't matter. Once the legal paperwork is filed, their opinions are irrelevant. The house can be sold within 2 weeks. And you're sure this is airtight?" Eric's laugh made my skin crawl. "I've done this 47 times, Sarah. Never had a challenge stick. Old people don't fight back, and their friends are usually dead or in facilities themselves." "Mike's going to be so relieved," Sarah said, the relief in her voice making me sick. "We owe more than the house is worth, but this should cover everything and give us a fresh start." "Just remember our agreement," Eric said, his tone hardening slightly. 15% of the sale price plus the expedite fee. Of course. You've been worth every penny." The call ended. I stood frozen in the shadows, my phone still recording the silence that followed. 47 times. They'd done this to 47 families. Eric's footsteps moved away toward the staff station. I waited another minute before retreating to my room, my mind reeling, the phone clutched in my hand like a lifeline. Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. I knocked on Robert's door with the urgency of a man carrying dynamite. He opened it, his face etched with concern. "John, what's wrong?" "Close the door," I whispered. "Get Mary and Frank, now." Robert's lawyer instincts kicked in immediately. Within 5 minutes, our little conspiracy was assembled in his room. The voices lowered, the door firmly closed. "I've got them," I said, holding up my phone. "Everything. Sarah, Eric, the whole operation." Mary gasped. Frank leaned forward, his eyes wide. Roberts sharpened with professional interest. "Play it," he said simply. The recording filled the small room. Sarah's voice, cold and calculating. Eric's casual admission of fraud. The number that made us all flinch. 47 victims. When it finished, silence stretched between us like a held breath. "Sweet mother of pearl," Frank whispered. "They're running a whole operation." Mary's face had gone pale. "Ma, that poor doctor. They're using his signature without his knowledge." Robert was already thinking 3 steps ahead. "John, this is substantial evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. How clear is the audio quality?" "Clear enough. I was maybe 10 feet away." "Good," Robert began, pacing the small space. "This recording, combined with documentation of the pattern across multiple residents, gives us grounds for both criminal charges and a civil action." Frank's hands clenched into fists. "So they're trying to steal what doesn't belong to them." "Exactly. And now we have proof," Robert confirmed. His professional demeanor had taken over completely. "Here's what we need to do. John, you've provided the smoking gun, but we need supporting documentation. Medical records, financial papers, anything that shows the pattern." "What about the other residents?" I asked. "Sure, some of them might be part of this same scheme." "Carefully approach the ones who seem alert, but maintain operational security," Robert cautioned. "If Eric suspects we're onto him, he'll destroy evidence and accelerate the timeline." Frank cracked his knuckles. "What about going to the police?" "We will," Robert said. "But we need enough evidence that they can't dismiss us as confused elderly people. The recording is crucial, but corroborating evidence will make the case bulletproof." We had a plan. We had hope. And we had the one thing they never counted on: a weapon. Our newfound purpose did not go unnoticed. We were too energized, too focused. We met by the windows, but our conversations were no longer the meandering complaints of the forgotten. They were quiet, intense, and short. We were soldiers planning a campaign, and our change in demeanor was as obvious as a flag being raised. Eric Palmer was no fool. He'd run his grift for years by being an expert reader of people, especially the elderly. He noticed the way I looked at him now, not with the defeated glaze of a new resident, but with the cold, assessing stare of an opponent. He saw Frank, no longer slouched in his chair, but sitting upright, watching the staff rotations. He saw Mary, her notebook always open, her pen scratching away. One afternoon, I saw him at the central nursing station, ostensibly reviewing patient charts on the computer. But his eyes weren't on the screen. They were flicking over to the security monitor feeds, his gaze lingering on the common room camera, where the 4 of us were sitting. A knot tightened in my stomach. He was watching us. Later that evening, Frank confirmed my fears. "He's pulling security logs," he whispered as we passed in the hallway. "Saw him on the admin computer when I went to get water. He was looking at footage from Tuesday night." near his office. He knew, or at least he suspected. The hunter was now being hunted, and we had just made ourselves the prey. The phone in my pocket suddenly felt 10 times heavier. The next day, a mandatory fall prevention seminar was scheduled in the main activity room. It was the perfect excuse to get every mobile resident out of their rooms for an hour. As we filed into the room, I saw Eric standing by the door, a clipboard in hand, a predatory smile on his face. He nodded at me as I passed. "Glad you could join us, John. Important information today." It was a threat. I sat through the mind-numbing lecture, my leg bouncing with anxiety. Every minute felt like an hour. Robert, sitting beside me, gave my arm a subtle squeeze. We both knew what was likely happening. The moment the seminar ended, I was the first one out the door, moving as fast as my cane would allow. I practically ran down the hall to room 247. The door was closed. I pushed it open. Everything looked the same. The bed was made. Dorothy's picture was on the nightstand, my toolbox in the corner. My phone was on the nightstand where I'd left it plugged in. My hands shook as I picked it up and navigated to the voice memo app. The file list was empty. "No recordings," the screen read. I sank onto the bed, the air knocked out of me. He had been in here. He had found it and deleted it. He'd left the phone behind as a message. "I know what you did. I'm in control. You have nothing." I walked back to the common room, defeated. I didn't have to say a word. The look on my face told Robert, Mary, and Frank everything. Our smoking gun was gone. We were back at square one, disarmed and exposed. Frank slammed a fist on the arm of his chair. "That son of a bitch." Mary's face was grim. "What do we do now?" Robert stared out the window, his expression unreadable. "He's overplayed his hand," he said quietly. "He thinks he's won. He's feeling confident. And confident people make mistakes." But as I looked at their faces, I saw the hope we'd felt just yesterday draining away, replaced by the familiar shadow of despair. And for the first time, I felt a sliver of doubt. Maybe Eric was right. Maybe old people just don't fight back. There was a nurse on the day shift named Anna. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, with a stern face and an attitude that kept everyone at a distance. She did her job with a cold efficiency, never smiling, never engaging in small talk. We'd all dismissed her as just another cog in the Sunset Haven machine, probably loyal to Eric. She was the one who always seemed to be around when Eric was making his rounds, a silent observer in the background. In the days after Eric wiped my phone, the four of us were adrift. Our meetings were listless. Our plans had evaporated. The weight of our failure was a palpable thing. It was during one of these grim, silent gatherings that I noticed Anna watching us from the nursing station. It wasn't the casual glance of a staff member. She was studying us, her brow furrowed in concentration. Later, she was changing the dressing on a cut on Frank's arm. He was grumbling about the flimsy equipment in the facility's workshop. "You should be more careful, Mr. O'Connor," she said, her voice flat. "Nothing to be careful with," Frank grunted. "It's all junk." "Maybe you're looking in the wrong places," she replied, her eyes flicking toward Eric's office down the hall before meeting Frank's. The look held for just a second too long. It was a message. Frank and I exchanged a confused look after she left. What did that mean? The next day, Robert was sitting alone in the library, poring over a dusty law book, when Anna approached. I was at a nearby table, pretending to read a magazine. "Mr. Wilson," she said, her voice barely a whisper, I know what Eric Palmer did. Robert looked up, his expression guarded. I don't know what you're talking about. The recording, she said, and Robert's facade cracked. I saw him review the security footage. I saw him go into Mr. Connor's room during the seminar. She took a deep breath. My grandfather was here 3 years ago. His story was just like yours. By the time we figured out what had happened, his house was gone and it was too late. I took this job to find proof, to stop him. She was trembling slightly, the cold mask of indifference gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability. Eric keeps a ledger, a physical book. He doesn't trust computers for everything. It's where he tracks the families, the properties, the payouts. It's in his office, in a locked file cabinet. Robert stared at her, speechless. I can't get it myself, she continued, her voice urgent and low. He'd know it was me. But I can give you a window. Tonight, at 2 a.m., during the shift change, I can disable the electronic lock on his office door for exactly 10 minutes. The security guard does his rounds on this floor at 2:15. You'll have from 2 Aucon to 2:10. After that, you're on your own. She placed a small, folded piece of paper on the table. That's the model number for the file cabinet lock. It's a standard wafer lock. Your friend Mr. O'Connor will know what to do with it. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Robert staring at the piece of paper as if it were a bomb. She was no enemy, she was an avenging angel, and she had just given us a second chance. At 1:55 a.m., the hallway was a cavern of shadows and silence. Frank and I stood pressed against the wall, our hearts pounding. Frank clutched 2 tension wrenches and a set of lockpicks he'd fashioned from the metal stays of a discarded binder. He was sweating, but his hands were steady. My job was lookout. You ready for this, Navy? He whispered. Born ready, engineer, I whispered back. At precisely 2 a.m., we heard the faintest of clicks from down the hall. The electronic lock on Eric's office door. That was Anna's signal. We moved. I stood at the junction of the hallway, peering into the gloom, while Frank knelt before the door. He inserted the tension wrench, applying gentle pressure. Okay. Come on, you bastard, he muttered, probing the lock with a pick. The seconds ticked by, each one a hammer blow in my chest. The first minute passed, then the second. A bead of sweat trickled down my temple. Frank, talk to me. Wafer lock, just like she said, he breathed. Tricky, but not impossible. Got 1, 2, 3. Suddenly, I heard the distant hum of the elevator. My blood ran cold. The night guard, maybe starting his rounds early. Frank, we've got company coming. Almost there, John. Don't rush me. His hands were a blur of controlled motion. Click, click, click. The sound was deafening in the silence. The elevator doors opened at the far end of the hall. I saw the silhouette of the guard stepping out. He was taking his time, checking his phone. We had maybe 60 seconds. Frank, now! I hissed. With a final satisfying thunk, the lock gave way. Frank pushed the door open, and we slipped inside, closing it silently behind us. The office smelled of stale coffee and Eric's cloying cologne. Frank went straight for the file cabinet while I pulled out my phone, the camera app ready. He worked on the cabinet lock, his movements faster, more frantic now. This one's cheaper, got it. He yanked the drawer open. Inside was a simple, black-covered ledger. I opened it. Page after page of handwritten notes. Names, addresses, property values, sale prices, and a column labeled EP fee. There were 47 entries. My name was the last one. My hands shook as I started photographing the pages. The phone's shutter sound silenced. Frank stood by the door, listening. 30 seconds, John. I got the last page. Done. We slipped back out into the hall just as the guard rounded the far corner. We were halfway back to my room, trying to look like two old men heading for the bathroom when he saw us. "Evening, gentlemen," he said. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "A little late for a stroll, isn't it?" "Just getting some water, son," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Old pipes need flushing." He grunted, unconvinced, but let us pass. We didn't breathe until we were back in my room with the door locked. We had it. We had the whole damn conspiracy in the palm of my hand. This time the evidence wasn't digital. It was real, it was tangible, and it was devastating. Friday afternoon. Robert and I sat in the back of a taxi heading downtown, officially on our way to my cardiologist appointment, a fiction carefully arranged by Anna. I gripped a manila envelope in my lap. It contained printouts of the ledger photos. "Nervous?" Robert asked quietly. "Excited," I corrected. "It's been months since I've had a real ace up my sleeve." The law office of Thomas Green occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower that scraped the Chicago sky. Professional, discreet, exactly what I'd needed back in August when Sarah's behavior first started raising red flags. "Mr. Connor," Thomas stood as we entered his oak-paneled office. "Right on time, and you must be Robert Wilson." Thomas retrieved a thick envelope from his safe, breaking the seal with practiced efficiency. "Your will from August last year is completely valid. Every page properly witnessed and notarized." He spread the papers across his mahogany desk. "As you can see, Mr. Connor has left his entire estate to the Veterans Administration Medical Center. No family inheritance whatsoever." Robert's eyebrows shot up. "John, you never mentioned." "I had my suspicions about Mike even then," I explained. "The way he looked at my house, asked questions about property values. So I took precautions." Thomas nodded approvingly. "Very wise. The will specifically excludes Sarah Connor Thornton from any inheritance, citing irreconcilable differences and financial irresponsibility." "We must wait until they commit illegal acts," Robert said slowly, his lawyer mind processing the implications. "If you reveal this too early, they might abandon the fraud." "Exactly my thinking," I said. "Let them dig their own grave first." "The beauty is," Thomas added, "once they falsify documents claiming mental incompetence, the will becomes even more powerful evidence of your sound mind and deliberate intent." Robert was already strategizing. "Combined with the evidence of the ledger, this creates an airtight case. They're not just committing fraud. They're doing it for property they'll never legally inherit." We had the trap. Now all we had to do was wait for them to walk into it. Monday afternoon found Frank hunched over the facility's computer during the designated recreation hour, his engineer's methodical mind working through real estate websites with surgical precision. "John, you need to see this." His voice carried barely contained excitement. I approached casually, aware of the other residents. On the screen, the Zillow listing stared back at me in full color. My front porch, the garden Dorothy had planted, the driveway where I'd taught Sarah to parallel park, all reduced to marketing copy and square footage, listed for sale at $380,000. "They work fast, the scoundrels," I muttered. Frank scrolled down to the seller information. "Says the property is being sold by Sarah Connor Thornton due to family relocation." Robert appeared at my shoulder. "This is exactly what we need. Evidence of a crime in progress. Frank, can you print this? Already on it. The printer whirred to life, producing hard copies. Our real estate agent is Jennifer Walsh from Midwest Properties. Posted 3 days ago. What about the price? I asked. Frank pulled up comparable sales. Market value should be closer to $420. They're pricing it to move fast. Desperate people make desperate choices, Robert observed. And desperate choices create evidence. Frank scrolled through the listing details. They're accepting offers immediately. Says motivated seller, quick closing preferred. He paused. According to the agent's calendar, the first showing is scheduled for this Thursday. 3 days from now. Perfect. That gave us exactly the timeline we needed. They thought they were operating in darkness, their fraud invisible. Time to turn on the lights. Thursday afternoon. The common room buzzed with its usual collection of dozing residents when Sarah and Mike walked in. Mike carried a briefcase that might as well have been labeled Final Betrayal. I activated my phone's recording app before they reached my chair. Dad. Sarah's voice carried that particular false brightness she'd perfected. You look so much better. The staff here is really taking good care of you. Hello, Sarah. I let my voice sound tired, defeated. The performance of a man who'd accepted his fate. Mike cut straight to business. John, just sign here. We're selling the house and buying you a better room. Private bathroom, bigger window, maybe even cable television. But we need to finalize the sale first, Sarah added quickly. Dad, we need the money now. Mike has important business deals. What happens to the money from the sale? I asked, leaning forward as if struggling to read. Don't worry about that. We'll take care of everything, Mike said, his impatience bleeding through. But where will I live when I get better? Sarah and Mike exchanged a glance that told me everything. Dad, you're not getting better, Sarah said, her voice turning cold. The doctors here have explained your condition. This is your home now. Forever. They say you have early dementia, Mike added. You just don't remember being sick. I let my face crumple with confusion and fear. I don't remember being sick. That's part of the disease, Dad, Sarah said smoothly. But we're handling everything. You just need to sign. I held the pen above the signature line, letting them think victory was within reach. My whole life, reduced to a single signature. Mike's patience finally snapped. Look, old man, this is happening whether you like it or not. Just sign the damn papers. Sarah shot him a warning look, but the mask had slipped. My phone had captured every threatening word. The final piece of the puzzle. I set the pen down. I need a minute to think. They waited, predators circling wounded prey, unaware that the prey had teeth of his own and was about to use them. The next morning, Friday at 10 a.m., the Cook County Courthouse rose before us like a granite monument to justice. Robert, dressed in a borrowed suit that was a size too big, adjusted his tie. It was the first real tie he'd worn in months. Ready for this, John? I've been ready since August, I said, patting the briefcase containing our arsenal. The new audio recording, the fraudulent real estate listing, the photos of Eric's ledger, and the one devastating surprise that would shatter my daughter's world. Next case, Connor versus Connor, the clerk announced when we reached the filing window. Robert spread our documentation across the counter. Your Honor, we have evidence of fraud, conspiracy, document falsification, and systemic elder abuse. Judge Margaret Davis examined the initial papers. her reading glasses perched on her nose like a judicial crown. Her eyes moved methodically through our evidence summary. Phone recordings, real estate listings, ledger photographs. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Wilson," she said, her voice firm. "Yes, and we're prepared to prove every one of them." She looked up from the papers, her gaze meeting mine. "Emergency hearing granted," she announced. "Given the ongoing nature of the alleged property theft, I'm scheduling this for next Thursday, March 6th. All parties will be notified." As we walked from the courthouse, Robert's professional satisfaction was evident. "John, in 50 years of practice, I have rarely seen evidence this comprehensive." 47 families, Robert," I said. 47. "Not anymore," he replied. Thursday morning, 9 a.m., courtroom 4B buzzed with energy. Sarah and Mike sat at the defendant's table, their lawyer whispering reassurances that would prove meaningless within the hour. They looked annoyed, confident this was just a procedural nuisance. Judge Davis called the session to order. Robert stood for his opening statement, every inch the professional attorney. "Your Honor, we will prove that the defendants, Sarah and Michael Thornton, conspired with an employee of the Sunset Haven facility to illegally declare the plaintiff, John Connor, mentally incompetent for the sole purpose of liquidating his assets. We will begin with a recording of the defendants admitting their intent." He placed my phone on the witness stand. The recording from their last visit filled the courtroom. Mike's impatient voice. "Just sign the damn papers." Sarah's cold declaration. "Dad, you're not getting better. This is your home now, forever." Sarah's face went white. Mike grabbed her arm, whispering frantically. Their lawyer stood quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. This recording was obtained without consent." "Overruled," Judge Davis said without looking up. "Illinois is a one-party consent state for recordings. Proceed, Mr. Wilson." The next hour was a symphony of justice. Frank testified about discovering the real estate listing, which was entered as Exhibit B. Mary presented her meticulous notes on suspicious family behavior patterns involving Eric Palmer. Then, Robert introduced the photographs of the ledger. The final witness for the prosecution was Eric Palmer. He'd taken a plea deal. "Yes, I falsified documents for a fee," he admitted under oath, his voice barely audible. "Miss Connor contacted me in January about expediting her father's mental incompetence declaration." "This isn't true," Sarah cried out, her voice cracking with desperation. "We just wanted to help him." "Help yourselves to my property," I replied calmly from the plaintiff's table. Sarah's emotional breakdown began during my testimony. 40 years, I told the court, my voice steady. I worked 3 jobs to give her everything she wanted, and this is how she repaid me. Not just betrayal, but criminal conspiracy. "Dad, please," Sarah sobbed. "We owe so much money. Mike's business failed, and we're about to lose everything." "So you decided to steal mine?" Mike finally exploded. "You selfish old man. You're going to die soon anyway. Why shouldn't we benefit from your property?" "That's enough." Judge Davis's gavel echoed like a gunshot. But I wasn't finished. The moment had arrived. "Your Honor," Robert said, "we'd like to present one final piece of evidence." Thomas Green approached the bench with my will, properly authenticated and sealed. This document, dated August 15, 2024, represents Mr. Connor's last will and testament. Sarah looked up from her tears, confused. "The will," Thomas announced to the silent courtroom, "leaves Mr. Connor's entire estate to the Veterans Administration Medical Center. Sarah Connor Thornton is specifically excluded from any inheritance." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. What? That's impossible. I looked directly at her, my voice quiet but carrying across the room. Every crime you committed was for property you would never inherit anyway. Mike's face turned purple with rage. You vindictive old bastard! Order in the court! Judge Davis reviewed the will. Her face was a mask of cold fury. This court finds sufficient evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and document falsification. Guilty verdicts for all defendants. The gavel fell with the finality of thunder. Bailiff, arrest warrants for Sarah Connor Thornton and Michael Thornton. As the handcuffs clicked around my daughter's wrists, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Sarah's sobs echoed through the courthouse halls as the police led them away, a tsunami of consequences finally crashing down upon her. Justice has prevailed, friends, I announced to Mary, Frank, and Robert as we watched the squad car pull away. John, you proved that age isn't the end, Mary said, her eyes bright with tears of satisfaction. It's just the beginning of wisdom. The ride back to Sunset Haven felt like a victory parade. Eric Palmer had already been arrested. The facility's management was scrambling to contain the scandal, while 47 families began receiving calls from federal investigators about their loved ones' situations. Mr. Connor, the new administrator stammered as I collected my belongings. We had no idea about Eric's activities. Please accept our sincere apologies. Your apologies are noted, I replied coolly, and rejected. Loading my car felt like emerging from a cave into sunlight. My toolbox, Dorothy's photographs, the Purple Heart, all returning home where they belonged. Mary, Frank, and Robert stood beside my packed car. 4 people who'd found a family in the most unlikely of circumstances. Thursday dinner's at my house, I announced. Starting this week. Dorothy always said a good meal shared with friends was the closest thing to heaven on earth. We'll bring dessert, Mary promised. And wine, Frank added with a grin. And conversation, Robert concluded. Lots of conversation. The drive home took me through neighborhoods I'd known for decades. My house welcomed me back like an old friend. The kitchen where Sarah had betrayed me now seemed brighter, ready for new memories. The dining room would now host my chosen family, the people who'd stood beside me when blood relations failed. The following Thursday evening arrived with the smell of pot roast and the sound of laughter. Mary brought her famous apple pie. Frank contributed a bottle of wine he'd been saving for something special. Robert arrived with legal updates. 18 months minimum, he reported over dinner. You knew Eric's cooperation bought him a lighter sentence, but your daughter and her husband are facing the full weight of federal fraud charges. A class action lawsuit is proceeding. This scandal is going to reshape elder care regulations nationwide. We ate and talked and laughed until almost midnight. 4 people who'd found something precious in the ruins of betrayal. Not blood relations, but something stronger. A family forged in crisis and tempered by justice. Later, after my friends had gone home, I sat in my recliner, looking at Dorothy's photograph on the mantelpiece. She smiled back, surrounded by pictures of a daughter who'd chosen greed over love. She made her choice, sweetheart, I whispered to the photo. And I made mine. Outside, snow fell softly on the garden Dorothy had planted, covering the earth with clean white possibilities. Spring would come soon, bringing new growth, new beginnings. Sarah had thrown away 40 years of love for money she would never receive. I'd gained something infinitely more valuable. The knowledge that real family isn't determined by blood, but by who stands beside you when everything falls apart. The old man they'd tried to discard had not only survived, he'd triumphed. And the best was yet to come. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.